Hi, this is Eric White. In this screencast, I'm going to focus on one of the interesting scenarios around OpenXML, and this is the scenario of using spreadsheets as a data source. Everyone is familiar with editing spreadsheets. It's very easy to go into a spreadsheet and edit data. I once heard a joke, and I'm not even so sure it is really a joke, that the most commonly used database in the world is, in fact, Excel, where people use spreadsheets as a database. There is a very convenient way to get that data out of an OpenXML spreadsheet and process it in interesting ways. The problem that I'm going to talk about in this screencast is a problem that I had of how to generate the pages that listed out all of the OpenXML content after we had made a survey of all the existing OpenXML content. If you come to openxmldeveloper.org and come down here to the bottom and click on the OpenXML Developer Wiki, you'll find a lot of interesting content down here in this wiki. And one of the things that you'll find here is these OpenXML content lists. Here I can click on OpenXML content by keyword. On this page I can see the various keywords with which I tagged all of the various pieces of content around OpenXML that I found out on the web. If you want to see all of the content around Open Packaging Conventions, you can click on this link here, OPC. It takes you to a list of all the OpenXML content topics around Open Packaging Conventions. Alternatively, if I wanted to see all of the content around SpreadsheetML, I can click here. In addition, I wanted to provide a means of seeing all the content written by a particular author. So if you want to see all of the content produced by Zayed Rajabi, you click on his name here, and here you can see all of the content that he produced. This was my goal that I had in mind when I was assembling this content list, but I had an interesting problem, which was that I didn't have a lot of budget to go and build a complicated web app. You could certainly implement this approach of navigating the content list using an Ajax application, but that was going to take more time than I had available at the moment. I had to kick out this content list and then get on to other projects that I had committed to. I had a similar problem on my own personal blog at ericwhite.com. I wanted to produce a blog table of contents, and in this blog table of contents I wanted to be able to click on any particular keyword and see, for instance, all of the topics associated with the client-side object model for SharePoint 2010. And again, I didn't have money or time to build a fairly involved Ajax application. So what to do? Well, let me show you how the OpenXML content is represented. I have a spreadsheet here, and in this spreadsheet there is a table. We could come over here to the Design tab and we can see that the table name is Content List. We can see that this is an OpenXML table where all of these columns have column headings that effectively give a name to all of the columns. There is a column that contains the link, the title, the summary, the author, the keyword. And in the case of keywords, in many cases I want to put in multiple keywords separated by commas, because a particular piece of content can be associated with a number of different keywords, of course. I also list the number of pages in the article, the language used, the technical level, and so on. What I did is I wrote a little C# program that is a functional transform that takes this OpenXML spreadsheet as a data source and produces the HTML that you can see when you browse the content list on OpenXML Developer. Let's go take a look at that project and run it and see how it works. This project makes use of the LTX OpenXML.cs module that I wrote quite some time ago This module enables you to query OpenXML spreadsheets in a very simple way. It has some special functionality around querying of tables. Here is the code to query the spreadsheet using the LTX OpenXML.cs module. The first thing that this code does is retrieve the table by its table name. Once having retrieved the table, you can dot into the table rows method, which yields up a collection of row objects that you can use an indexer to retrieve the various values in the row object. I use this LTX OpenXML module fairly often when I am querying spreadsheets and using spreadsheets as a data source. It's pretty useful. You can find out more about this module here at this link where I introduce this code. You can see that this is a fairly weakly typed approach. If you use the wrong name for one of these columns, the code will simply throw an exception telling you that the column doesn't exist. The first thing that this transform from SpreadsheetML to HTML does is it projects a strongly typed list of objects out of the fairly weakly typed list of rows that it retrieves from the query. This content list variable contains then a list of strongly typed objects. It's a list of this content item class with all the data from that spreadsheet. You can see that it's a very, very small amount of code to retrieve the data from that spreadsheet. There's a query, and then there's this projection, and at the end of that code, the module has a strongly typed list of data. At that point in time, the code then generates a page for the content by keyword. It also then generates a page for the content by author, and then the code is done. Come up here and take a look at the code that does the actual generation. This is, at least to me, an interesting approach in that it uses string.format to provide composability in a pure functional transform of OpenXML to HTML. There are these various templates, and in these various templates you can see the text that indicates where parameters should go when you use string.format to produce a new string. Up at the top here you can see that I've made a couple of different approaches for assigning the base URI for the keyword page and the author page. When running it locally and just playing around with the data and playing around with the generation, you use these simple base URIs. And of course, when I'm generating the content list to go on OpenXMLDeveloper.org, I use these much more elaborate base URIs that then generate the appropriate HTML to go on OpenXMLDeveloper.org. Further, there's one more if-def down here. This version enables generating a complete HTML page for each of those pages. When placing this content on OpenXMLDeveloper.org, the HTML template is much simpler. It doesn't need an HTML element, a head element, a body element, and so on. That's already contained in the page. Instead, I need just the markup for the tables and the content on those content list pages. Other than that, it's just a fair amount of code to produce the HTML from that content list. It's not a very long program, including all of the comments and everything. It's 281 lines of code. Let's run this. I'll press Control F5 and it runs. And now let's look at the generated HTML. Here is the OpenXML content by keyword page, and here is the OpenXML content by author page. If I open the OpenXML content by keyword, here is the content. Now, of course, there are some additional CSS styles that are applied to all of this content, which explains why this looks a little bit different than what you see on openxmldeveloper.org. But in fact, this is the exact HTML that I use when I update those content lists on openxmldeveloper.org. Here all of the various keywords work. I can click on, for instance, code snippets and come down to the list of code snippets topics. I can click over here and look at all the docx generation topics. And further, I can also click over here. This goes over to the other list of content by author and shows all the contents by me or all of the contents by Doug Mayhew and so on. That's all I'm going to cover in this screencast. Feel free to follow me on Twitter at EricWhiteDev. Also, it may be interesting to you to follow OpenXMLDev on Twitter, and you can follow my blog at ericwhite.com. Thanks for watching.